The mug was still warm in my hands when I realized I hadn't taken a single sip. I don't know what stopped me. Maybe it was the smell. Chamomile? The same tea Diane always made for me on Sunday mornings. But something was slightly off. Like a note in a familiar song played just a half step wrong. Or maybe it was the dream. The dream I'd been trying to push out of my head since 4 in the morning. My husband Eddie had been gone for 2 years and 3 months. I know the exact count because I still mark it on the small calendar I keep by the nightstand, the one with the cardinals on it, the kind he used to buy me every Christmas from the church gift shop. 2 years and 3 months, and I had not dreamed of him once. Not once. Grief counselors tell you that's normal. They tell you the mind protects itself. I believed them. Until 3 nights ago. In the dream, Eddie was sitting at our kitchen table. Not the sick version of Eddie, not the one with the tubes in the hospital gown and the eyes that had gone somewhere far away toward the end. This was the Eddie from our early years. Broad shoulders, that ridiculous mustache he refused to shave until our youngest daughter's wedding, the flannel shirt he wore every Saturday without fail. He looked at me the way he used to look at me when he had something important to say and was choosing his words carefully. He said, "Bev, don't drink what she gives you." That was all. He didn't explain. He didn't stay. The dream dissolved the way dreams do. And I woke up at 4:12 a.m. with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I lay there for a long time telling myself it was just grief finally surfacing. The counselors had warned me about that too, that sometimes it comes late, in strange shapes. I told myself Eddie's voice in my dream meant I missed him, nothing more. But I couldn't stop thinking about the word she. Don't drink what she gives you. My daughter-in-law's name is Diane. She moved into my home 14 months ago, right around the time my son Kevin started having what the doctors were calling episodes. Dizzy spells at first. Then fatigue so heavy he could barely get out of bed on weekends. Then 2 trips to the ER in 6 months. Both times with symptoms that the attending physicians chalked up to stress, to overwork, to the kind of generalized deterioration that they tell men in their late 40s to expect if they don't slow down. Kevin is 44. He runs his own landscaping company. He's never been sick a day in his life, not really sick. Growing up, the boy went through winters without catching so much as a cold when everyone around him was dropping. Watching him shuffle from the bedroom to the couch last Thanksgiving, wrapped in a blanket at 2 in the afternoon, I had the unsettled feeling that something was wrong in a way the doctors weren't seeing. But I told myself he's stressed. The business had a rough year. He and Diane had been arguing more than usual. I could hear it through the wall of my bedroom, the low, urgent tones of 2 people trying to fight quietly in a house where someone else is sleeping. I told myself it wasn't my place to ask. I am not the kind of mother-in-law who inserts herself. I want that on record. When Kevin brought Diane home 11 years ago, I made a conscious decision to give that woman my full respect and my full space. I bit my tongue at Christmas dinners. I called ahead before visiting. I never once commented on how she kept the house or how she raised my grandchildren. I loved her, or I tried to, the way you try to love someone who holds your son's happiness in their hands. I moved in only because Kevin asked me to. After Eddie died, the house felt like it was swallowing me. Kevin was worried. He said the grandkids, my grandson Teddy, who's 9, and my granddaughter June, who just turned 6, would love having Grandma Bev around. He said I'd have my own space. He set up the room at the back of the house with my good lamp and my books and the blue quilt Eddie's mother had made. And I felt, for the first time in months, that I might be okay. Diane had smiled at me from the doorway of that room and said, "We're so glad you're here." I believed her. The tea thing started in October. Every evening around 8 o'clock, after the kids were in bed, Diane would make 2 mugs of chamomile and bring one to me in the sitting room where I like to read. It was a kind gesture. I received it as one. We'd sit together sometimes and she'd tell me about her day, and I'd tell her about whatever book I was reading, and it was the closest thing to companionship I'd found since moving in. I looked forward to it. I never thought to question it. Then Eddie came to me in that dream, and I set the mug on the side table, and I sat there in the dark looking at it, and I thought, don't be ridiculous, Bev. This is chamomile tea. This is your son's wife. This is your home. I picked up the mug. I brought it to my lips. I didn't drink. I poured it down the bathroom sink instead, quietly, so Diane wouldn't hear. I told myself I'd feel foolish about it by morning. I did not feel foolish. What I felt by morning was observant in a way I hadn't been in months. Grief does something to your attention. It narrows it, turns it inward. For 2 years I had been looking at my own loss. Now I was looking outward, and I was noticing things. I noticed that Diane had been on her phone a great deal more than usual, not scrolling. I know the glazed look of scrolling. This was typing. Concentrated, private typing. The phone angled away, screen dimmed. She'd look up when she heard footsteps. I noticed that she had started handling Kevin's medications. He'd been prescribed something for blood pressure a few months back, a new development the doctors attributed to his stress. The bottles lived on the kitchen counter. I had watched Diane, more than once, open a bottle and count out a pill before bringing it to Kevin with a glass of water and a smile that I now, looking back, found difficult to read. I noticed that 3 weeks ago she had asked me, casually, over dinner, whether I had updated my will since Eddie passed. I'd said yes, that I had taken care of everything. She'd nodded and said, "Smart, you just never know," and changed the subject. I had not thought about that moment again until now. Kevin has a home office in the basement. I had never gone through it. That is not something I would do. But the morning after I poured the tea down the sink, Kevin left early for a job site, and Diane took the kids to school. And I found myself standing at the top of the basement stairs, with my hand on the door frame, and my heart making arguments my common sense was trying to dismiss. I went down. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I told myself I was looking for the folder of Eddie's old documents that Kevin had said he'd filed away safely. That was my reason. My excuse, maybe. What I found was not Eddie's documents. On Kevin's desk, half tucked under a landscaping catalog, was a manila folder. Inside it were printed emails, recent by the dates, between Diane and a man whose name I didn't recognize. I read them standing up because I couldn't make myself sit down. They were not the emails of 2 people conducting any sort of ordinary business. The language was careful. They were clearly aware that someone might someday read these words, but the meaning was plain enough. They had been meeting. They had been planning. There were references to timelines, to the situation with Kay, to something one of them called the transition. One email dated 6 weeks ago said, "Once the property transfers, we can move. Be patient. These things take time when you do them right." The property. My son owns his home outright. He bought it before the market went sideways, before the interest rates, paid it off early the way his father had taught him. That house is his. It would, in the event of something happening to him, pass to Diane. And then to whoever Diane chose. I put the folder back exactly as I had found it, and I walked upstairs and I sat at the kitchen table and I did not move for a long time. I called my doctor that afternoon from my car, parked 2 streets away. I told her I'd been having some concerns about my own health, some unexplained fatigue, some mild disorientation. I asked whether it would be possible to do a blood panel. Routine, I said. Peace of mind. She scheduled me for the following Tuesday. In the meantime, I started paying very close attention to what I was eating and drinking and who had prepared it. I bought a small case of bottled water from the drugstore and kept it in my room. I accepted food only when it came from packages I had opened myself or from meals I had cooked. I ate breakfast early before anyone else was up. I felt, doing these things, both completely sane and slightly unhinged. I kept asking myself whether I was a woman who had found genuine cause for alarm or a grieving 63-year-old who had dreamed about her dead husband and was now constructing a conspiracy from ordinary objects. I genuinely did not know. I needed information. I started with the medication. Kevin's blood pressure prescription was refilled every 30 days. I took a photograph of the bottle label when Diane wasn't home and sent it to my nephew, who is a pharmacist in Cincinnati. I asked him to tell me about the medication, what it looked like, what the standard dosage was, whether there were any concerns with long-term use. He called me back the same evening. He said the medication was a standard beta blocker, nothing unusual. Then he said, "Aunt Bev, can I ask why you're asking?" I told him I was just trying to understand Kevin's health situation better. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "If you're worried about anything being added to medication, which I'm not saying you should be, the only way to know for certain is a lab test on the actual substance." I said, "I know." He said, "Be careful." I said, "I will." The blood panel results came back 8 days later. My doctor called me directly, which he doesn't always do, and the careful professional neutrality in her voice told me something before she said anything specific. She said my results showed trace amounts of a compound that had no business being in my system. She used technical language I had to ask her to repeat twice. What she was describing in plain terms was a sedative, a mild one, she said, one that in small repeated doses would produce exactly the symptoms I had mentioned: fatigue, slight disorientation, a general fog. Exactly the symptoms Kevin had been experiencing for months. She said she was obligated to ask me directly whether I had taken anything, any supplement, any sleep aid, anything not prescribed. I said no. She said she was going to refer me to a specialist and that she strongly recommended I speak with someone I trusted about my living situation. I sat in the parking lot of the medical center for 45 minutes after that call. The trees along the far edge of the lot had already gone orange and red, the way they do in Ohio in October, and I watched the leaves come off in the wind, and I thought about Eddie sitting at our kitchen table in my dream with his serious face and his flannel shirt. "Don't drink what she gives you." He knew. Somehow, some part of whatever remains of the people we love. I don't know what to call it. I'm not a mystic. I'm a retired middle school librarian from Dayton, Ohio. But something new, and it came to me the only way it could. I drove home. I made dinner. I smiled at Diane across the table. I helped Teddy with his multiplication tables after dinner, and I read June 2 chapters of the book about the lighthouse keeper's daughter, the one she'd been asking about all week, and I kissed them both good night. Then I went to my room and I made 3 phone calls. The first call was to my nephew again. I told him what the doctor had said. He was silent for a long time, and then he said, "Aunt Bev, you need to talk to the police." I said I knew that, but I also knew that trace compounds in a blood panel and printed emails with careful language and a woman who asked about wills at dinner, none of that by itself was going to be enough. I needed something clearer. The second call was to my friend Ruth Ann, who had been my closest friend for 31 years and who had worked in the county courthouse until she retired. She didn't dispense legal advice. What she did was listen and ask the right questions, and at the end of the call she said, "You need to document everything you can before you move, and you need to get Kevin away from that house." The third call was to my son. That was the hardest one. How do you tell your child that the person he comes home to every night may be poisoning him slowly? How do you say that without sounding like a jealous, meddling mother who never accepted his wife? I had spent 11 years building the credibility of not being that woman. I spent 11 years making sure Kevin would never have reason to doubt my motives when it mattered. I hoped it had been enough. Kevin answered on the second ring. He sounded tired. He always sounded tired now. I asked him if he could meet me for breakfast the next morning, just the two of us, before he went to the job site. I told him I needed to talk to him about something and that it was important. He said, "Mom, is everything okay?" I said, "I love you very much, and I need you to hear me out before you react. Can you do that?" A pause. Then, yeah, of course. I told him everything over eggs and coffee at the diner on Wilmington Avenue, the one we used to go to when he was in high school, the one that still has the same red vinyl booths and the pie rotating in the glass case by the register. I had brought the photograph of the medication bottle, the printout of what my nephew had explained to me, and a written summary of what I had read in the emails. I had not taken the emails themselves, because I wanted nothing in that house to look disturbed. I watched my son's face while I talked. He went through several expressions in the space of 20 minutes. Disbelief first, and I had expected that. I had steeled myself for it. Then a specific kind of stillness that I recognized from when he was a boy. The stillness he got when he was processing something he didn't want to be true. Then something that broke my heart to see. A look of someone remembering, going back through months of moments and re-examining them with new information. He put his fork down. He said, "The dizziness started in March." I said, "Yes." He said, "She started making my coffee in the mornings around February." I didn't say anything. I let him sit with it. He put his hand over his eyes and he stayed like that for a while. When he looked up, his jaw was set in a way that reminded me so much of Eddie that I had to look at my coffee cup. He said, "What do we do?" We went to the police that afternoon. The detective who took our statement was a woman named, and I remember thinking this was somehow exactly right, Vera, Detective Vera Hutchins. She was about Kevin's age, efficient and direct and not dismissive, which I had been afraid of. She listened to everything. She asked careful questions about the timeline, about the emails, about my medical results. At the end, she said they would need to act carefully, that if this was what it appeared to be, they would want to build the case properly. She asked whether I could continue living in the house for a short time without alerting Diane that anything had changed. I said I could. I am a retired librarian. I have a face that is very good at looking calm. The next 11 days were the strangest of my life, and I have had a life that has included burying a husband and a mother and 2 close friends, so that is saying something. I went through the routines. I accepted the evening tea and poured it away. I ate what I prepared for myself. I watched Diane moving through our shared space, making lunches, helping with homework, laughing at something on television, and I tried to reconcile the woman I was looking at with what I knew, and I couldn't fully do it. And I think that is the most disturbing part of all of this. She was not a monster who looked like a monster. She was someone who had learned to look exactly like everything you'd want her to be. Kevin, to his enormous credit, held himself together. He scaled back the coffee Diane made him. He had his medications independently analyzed by a lab through my nephew's contacts. The results came back within a week. The prescription itself was fine. But a separate supplement Diane had started giving him 6 months ago, just something for energy, the naturopath recommended it, contained something it absolutely should not have. Detective Hutchins moved when she had enough. Diane was at the grocery store when they executed the search warrant. I was home with the children. Teddy was doing his homework at the kitchen table, and June was watching something on the tablet, and neither of them knew that there were officers going carefully through their mother's things upstairs. through her bedside table and her laptop and the locked box in the top shelf of the closet that turned out to contain a great deal of information about Diane and the man from the emails whose name was not important to me anymore. Kevin came home 20 minutes after it started. He sat in the kitchen with the kids and he helped Teddy with the last of his homework and he watched June's show with her and he was holding himself so carefully that it made me want to weep. When the detective came downstairs, she gave Kevin a long, quiet look and he nodded. Diane was arrested at the Kroger on Far Hills Avenue. Kevin's neighbor, a retired teacher named Alma who watches everything from her front porch, told me she saw the police car turn onto our street that afternoon and said to her husband, "Something's happening at the Baxter house." She was right. Something was ending. The man from the emails was brought in separately. He had, it turned out, a prior. The DA moved forward with charges: attempted poisoning, conspiracy, financial fraud, because the investigation uncovered that Diane had already begun the process of quietly refinancing the house using documents that were not legitimate. The property transfer had already been partially set in motion. Kevin changed every lock the next morning. I helped him. We didn't talk much while we did it, just worked our way through the doors, one by one, in the cold November air. Teddy and June know only that their mother is away and that there are grown-up problems being handled by grown-ups. Kevin is careful with them in the way that good fathers are careful, honest in the ways that are appropriate, protective in the ways that are necessary. He has started family counseling for all three of them. They eat breakfast together every morning now and I make the pancakes on Saturdays, the ones with blueberries that Teddy has required from me every weekend since he was 4 years old. Kevin's dizziness started clearing up within 3 weeks of stopping the supplement. His doctor says the effects should be fully reversed. He went back to the job site in December and called me from the truck on his way home to tell me that for the first time in months, he hadn't felt like he needed to sit down by 2 o'clock. His voice on the phone. I can't describe it exactly. Relief with something cautious still underneath it, the way you feel when you've been afraid for so long that safety doesn't fully register yet. I know that feeling. I think about Eddie's dream often. I've thought about whether to tell Kevin about it, and in the end I did, because I didn't want to keep any more secrets in that house. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Dad always looked out for us." I said, "Yes, he did. He does." I am still in the back bedroom with the blue quilt and my good lamp and my books. I will stay as long as they need me. The Cardinals calendar on the nightstand has been replaced with a new one, same Cardinals, New Year, and I still mark the months since Eddie, because I don't think I'll ever stop. But I sleep better now, and every morning I make my own tea. I still think about the moment I stood at the top of those basement stairs with my hand on the doorframe, arguing with myself about whether to go down. That moment scares me more than anything else, looking back. Not because of what I found, but because of how close I came to not looking. How easy it would have been to tell myself I was a foolish old woman who'd had a strange dream, to drink the tea, to let the fog keep settling in and call it aging. People do that. I almost did that. And I think about all the women who have done exactly that. Who trusted when they should have questioned. Who stayed quiet when something in them was trying to speak. And I feel something I don't have a clean word for. Somewhere between grief and gratitude. What I know now is that decency has consequences, and so does the absence of it. Not in any cosmic or religious sense. I'm not making that argument. I mean it practically, the way things actually unfold when you watch closely enough. Diane built something on a foundation of harm, and that foundation collapsed under the weight of its own dishonesty. It collapsed because the evidence existed. It collapsed because Kevin had a mother who loved him enough to go down a staircase she had no business being on. It collapsed because I had spent 11 years being the kind of person whose son would sit across a diner table and hear me out before he reacted. That credibility, The slow, unglamorous accumulation of it over years of biting my tongue and calling ahead and respecting boundaries, that was what made the difference when it mattered most. Goodness isn't always visible until the moment it's needed. Then it's the only thing that works. And I learned something about my own mind that I hadn't fully trusted before. There is a kind of intelligence that isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up as a smell that's slightly off, a question that surfaces at 4 in the morning, a hesitation before you raise a mud to your lips. I had spent most of my life being practical, reasonable, evidence-based. A librarian's temperament, Eddie always said, which was meant affectionately. But I had also spent a lot of years dismissing the quieter signals, the ones that didn't come with documentation. What I learned is that paying attention is its own form of wisdom. Noticing is a skill. Following the thread of a question you can't yet explain, that is not foolishness. That is how you survive. The hardest part was the 11 days of waiting, of smiling across the dinner table, of reading June her chapters and helping Teddy with multiplication and acting like nothing in the world was wrong, while everything in my chest was wound tight as a watch spring. I don't say that to sound brave. I say it because I think we underestimate what ordinary people are capable of when they have no choice but to be steady. You find out what you're made of, not in the dramatic moments, but in the quiet endurance between them. In the decision, made again each morning, to hold on one more day and do what needs doing. Kevin is okay, the kids are okay, I make blueberry pancakes on Saturdays and I sleep through the night, and Eddie's cardinals are on the wall by the nightstand. That's what I have. It's enough. It's more than enough. If you love someone, tell them clearly. If something feels wrong, ask the question. And if you have the chance to act with integrity over a long stretch of ordinary time, do it, even when no one is watching. Especially then. You never know when it will be the only thing standing between your family and something unthinkable.